March 16, 2008, Santa Monica, California. It's early evening when Santa Monica police pull up outside a small apartment on the 1500 block of Centinela Avenue. The call didn't come from a neighbor. It didn't come from a roommate. It came from out of state. A worried mother in Tucson, Arizona had phoned the department and said, "I can't reach my daughter. Something's wrong." Officers knock on the door. No answer. They force their way in. Inside, the place is quiet, but it's not calm. There are signs of a struggle. The living room looks disturbed, like there was a fight. Things aren't just messy. They're violent. It feels like something happened fast and hard. What the officers find in the bedroom stops everything. On the floor is 21-year-old Juliana Redding. She's not breathing. There are marks on her neck, bruising, swelling, evidence that someone used their hands and their full body weight to cut off her air and keep it cut off. There are also signs that she tried to fight back. This wasn't quick. This wasn't clean. This was a struggle for her life. Juliana Redding was dead, beaten, strangled, in her own home. And this is not the first awful thing police learned that night. When investigators start pulling phone records, they find out something chilling. The night before, at around 9:52 p.m., a 911 call went out from Juliana's phone. A call for help. But the call didn't make it through. According to investigators, she managed to dial, and then somebody grabbed the phone out of her hand and cut the line. So now detectives are thinking about the timeline like this. Juliana is alive late the night of March 15th. Something happens inside that apartment. She tries to call for help. The killer stops her. By the next evening, March 16th, her mother can't reach her, panics, and calls from Arizona begging police to check on her daughter. When officers finally go inside, Juliana is already gone. Whoever killed her didn't just kill her, they shut down her last chance to save herself. This is already brutal. But the crime scene has even more to say. As detectives process the apartment, they find something strange in the kitchen. One of the stove knobs, the right front burner, has been turned on. Gas was left flowing. There are also candles lit in the home. To detectives, that looks like an attempt at a cover-up. Turn on the gas. Leave open flame. Walk away. Let the whole place blow and burn, and with it, the evidence. But it didn't work. The apartment didn't ignite. The scene remained. And the scene is telling a story. Juliana's body shows signs of a beating and strangulation. There's no forced entry to the apartment. This doesn't look like a random break-in. This looks like Juliana either let someone in or already knew the person who attacked her. It gets darker. Forensics techs start swabbing surfaces. They swab Juliana's neck. They swab her t-shirt, front and back. They swab the stove knob. They swab her phone. They even lift a bloody fingerprint from a dish in the sink. It's not just some DNA. It's the same female profile, over and over and over, all around the apartment, including on Juliana's own skin. In other words, whoever did this was close enough to put hands directly on her throat. That night, detectives don't have a name for that DNA yet. They just know one thing. This was personal. So who was Juliana Redding? And why would anyone want her dead? Juliana wasn't famous, not yet. But in Los Angeles terms, she was close enough to touch it. She was 21, tall, brown-haired, pretty, with the kind of face that gets you called marketable in casting rooms. She had moved from Arizona to Southern California to give herself a shot. She'd done some modeling. She had been featured in Maxim's Hometown Hotties. She'd landed a small role in a low-budget indie film. She was auditioning, hustling, waiting tables, doing exactly what so many girls in Santa Monica and Hollywood do at 19, 20, 21. Trying to get in the door before the door closes. At the same time, she was still close with her family back home. Her parents weren't stage parents. They were regular people. Her father, Greg Redding, was a pharmacist in Arizona. Her mother was still in Tucson. They worried about her, but they also believed in her. And Juliana called them. She checked in. She was not the kind of daughter who vanishes for days, so when her mom couldn't reach her for an entire day, no answer, no text back, nothing, that wasn't normal. That was emergency level wrong. That's why she called police from Tucson and begged for a welfare check. That's why officers even went to that apartment at all. There's another detail about Juliana's life in California that becomes extremely important later. Before her death, Juliana briefly dated a man named Munir Uwaida, a wealthy doctor and businessman. He was older, successful, flashy. He had money, he had influence, and according to prosecutors, he had a reputation for using pressure and intimidation to get what he wanted. Juliana ended that relationship after she and her family learned he wasn't exactly presenting himself honestly, that he was older than he said, and that he might not have been as available as he claimed to be. But even after the romantic part was over, there was still a link. Juliana had introduced Uwaida to her father, Greg. The doctor wanted Greg, the pharmacist, to help him with a business venture involving a pain cream and a pharmaceutical operation. Serious money, serious stakes. We're not talking small side hustle. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in salary and bonuses on the table. For a while, it looked like that partnership might happen. Then it started to fall apart. Greg Redding began backing away. He didn't like what he was seeing. He had questions about whether the business was being run legally. He didn't trust it. He shut it down. 5 days later, Juliana was dead. Now pause. From the outside, the picture looks like a Hollywood nightmare. Young, aspiring actress strangled in her Santa Monica apartment. But when you move in closer, it doesn't look like a Hollywood story at all. It looks like a message. Because here's what detectives are starting to see, even this early. There's no sign that Juliana was robbed. There's no sign that she was sexually assaulted. There's no forced entry. There's evidence someone tried to blow up the apartment afterward. There's a 911 call that gets cut off mid-emergency, and there is one woman's DNA, one woman's physical presence, on Juliana's throat, on her phone, on her clothes, on her stove, in her kitchen, in her home. Not a man, a woman. Detectives start building out a suspect list, and this is where the case becomes obsessive for Santa Monica police. They start by looking at the obvious circle: friends, neighbor, co-workers, women Juliana knew personally. They collect DNA samples from dozens of females, more than 40 according to investigators, and compare them against what was pulled from the crime scene. No match. Whoever was all over that apartment was not one of Juliana's known friends. Meanwhile, word of the murder starts circulating among Juliana's people back in Arizona. This isn't gossip, it's grief mixed with anger. Her friends and family believe immediately that she was killed, not by some random intruder, but because of something bigger, something she didn't even cause. They're already saying, this wasn't random, this was a hit. Santa Monica detectives won't use that word out loud, not yet. But quietly, they are already thinking the same direction. Because the truth is, this doesn't look like a drug deal gone wrong. It doesn't look like a burglary that escalated. It doesn't look like a jealous actress rivalry. It looks like someone came to that apartment to make a point and make sure Juliana Redding never spoke again. And before long, detectives are going to land on a name: a woman in her 40s. A woman who, according to prosecutors, was known as the Muscle. A woman allegedly described by a California doctor as his female James Bond. A woman whose DNA investigators say is everywhere in that apartment. Her name, Kelly Soo Park. And when police finally get her into custody, the case explodes. When police zipped Juliana Redding's body bag and cleared her apartment that March night in 2008, They didn't just walk out with grief and guesses. They walked out with something hard, DNA. Not from a mystery drifter, not from an ex-boyfriend, from a woman. And not just one little trace. We're talking about a full biological calling card all over the scene. On Juliana's neck, on Juliana's shirt, on Juliana's phone. The same phone that tried to dial 911 before the call was cut off. On the stove knob that had been turned to on, sending gas into the apartment while candles were left burning. Like someone wanted the place to blow. Even in the kitchen, in blood. Whoever attacked Juliana wasn't careful. She was close, hands-on, violent. And forensics say she left pieces of herself everywhere. That detail alone makes this case different from most young Hollywood murder stories. It's not a jealous boyfriend snapped. It's not a home invasion gone bad. The evidence is pointing to something colder, uglier, and more planned. Detectives start working with what they have. They know the killer is almost certainly female. They know Juliana fought like hell. They know this person tried, and failed, to turn the whole place into a fireball. And they know Juliana tried to call for help mid-attack. But in 2008, they don't have a name. So they start doing something that sounds simple, but takes months. They start collecting DNA from women, friends, former roommates, co-workers, neighbors, anyone who'd been in and out of Juliana's orbit. Santa Monica PD swabbed dozens of females and ran those samples against the profile found all over Juliana's apartment. No match. Over and over. No match. That's when investigators stop thinking, who did Juliana know? And start thinking, who wanted access to her? And that's when the story leaves Santa Monica and slides into money. Because while Juliana was trying to model, audition, and keep up rent, there were people around her talking about serious cash, real corporate money, and they were not actors. They were business people, medical people. Juliana, not long before she was killed, had briefly been in a relationship with an older man, Dr. Munir Uwaida. He was a flashy Beverly Hills-type figure, a surgeon, a businessman, someone who moved through money-heavy circles. He was the kind of guy who could talk fast and make big things sound easy. Juliana ended that relationship. She found out things about him she didn't like. She moved on. But even after she moved on, there was still a link. And this is the part that becomes deadly. While they were seeing each other, Juliana had introduced Uwaida to her dad, Greg Redding. Greg wasn't Hollywood. He was a licensed pharmacist from Arizona. And Uwaida, according to prosecutors later, wanted Greg. He wanted Greg's pharmacy license. He wanted Greg's credibility. He wanted Greg to help him with one of his companies, a pain cream, pharmaceutical venture that, on paper, looked like it could pay huge. It sounded like an opportunity. Greg listened. Numbers were discussed, salary, bonuses, ownership. But over time, Greg started getting uncomfortable. He didn't like what he was seeing in the paperwork. He didn't like what he was hearing about how the business was being run. He looked into the doctor, and what he saw wasn't reassuring. He started to believe this operation wasn't clean. So on March 10, 2008, Greg said no. He backed out of the deal. He essentially told Uwaida, "I'm not doing this." 5 days later, on March 15, 2008, his daughter Juliana was attacked in her Santa Monica apartment, strangled, beaten, dragged, left on her bedroom floor. The gas was turned on, candles were left burning. Her 911 call was cut off. That timing would become the beating heart of the prosecution's theory. Detectives naturally look at Uwaida. They look at his world, his businesses, his inner circle. They pull records. They interview people around him. They ask, who does this guy trust to handle problems? And they hear one name, Kelly Soo Park. When police first hear of Kelly Soo Park, she doesn't sound like an assassin. She sounds almost boring. She's not some cartel soldier. She's not a biker. She's not covered in tattoos. She's a Southern California woman in her 40s, attractive, put together, real estate license, drives nice cars, takes care of things for the doctor. But the deeper detectives dig, the more disturbing that picture gets. People around Dr. Ueda, according to investigators, described Park as his fixer. Prosecutors would later repeat something even harsher. They said he called her his female James Bond. She was paid well, reportedly, around $10,000 a month, and not for filing paperwork. According to law enforcement, her job was pressure. If someone owed the doctor money, Kelly would visit and make them rethink their position. If someone was backing out of a deal, Kelly would show up and talk to them. If someone was causing him trouble, Kelly handled it. That's the story prosecutors would later lay out. Park as muscle, Park as enforcer, Park as the one who showed up when polite phone calls stopped working. Detectives decide they want her DNA. But Kelly Soo Park is not stupid. She's not walking into the station and cheerfully swabbing her cheek for Santa Monica PD. So police do something old school. They follow her. They wait until she smokes. And when she's done, and she flicks her cigarette butt, they take it. That discarded cigarette goes straight to the lab. The lab runs it. And that's when, according to investigators, jaws drop. Because the DNA on that cigarette lines up with the DNA that's everywhere in Juliana Redding's apartment. Neck, clothes, phone, front door, stove knob. The profile matches. Detectives now have a name for the ghost in the room. Kelly Soo Park. At this point, the case goes from we may have our killer to we may have our motive. Prosecutors start to put their narrative together. They say this was not random. They say Park didn't even know Juliana personally. They say there's no evidence Juliana and Park had a friendship, a feud, or even a single conversation before that night. In their version, this is how it works. Juliana dates Ueda. Through Juliana, Ueda meets her father and tries to lock in Greg for a lucrative pharmacy medical operation. Greg pulls out of the deal on March 10th. That threatens money and threatens face. 5 days later, Juliana is dead. And the woman whose DNA is all over Juliana's body, her clothes, her phone, and the attempted cover-up scene is not a jealous lover or a random thief. It's the doctor's fixer, Kelly Soo Park. In plain language, prosecutors are saying this wasn't a love triangle. This was business intimidation that turned into murder. But defense attorneys see the police theory forming and start preparing their counterattack early. They know what this looks like to a jury. Female James Bond shows up to scare the daughter and ends up choking her to death. That sells. That's a movie. So they build their wall. First, they hit motive. They say, listen, law enforcement is spinning this into a shakedown story, but you cannot prove that anybody told Kelly Soo Park to threaten Juliana. You can't prove she went there to send a message. You're guessing why she would even be in that apartment. Then, they hit something even more dangerous for the state, DNA transfer. The prosecution's biggest weapon is the DNA. The defense tries to turn that weapon back around. Kelly's attorney says, DNA moves, DNA spreads, people shed skin cells and hair constantly. 2 people shake hands, hug, share an object. Now that DNA can travel, he floats the idea that Kelly may have been around something of Juliana's earlier, like a towel or an item carried from one place to another, and that some unknown real killer could have brought that item into Juliana's apartment and, without knowing it, smeared Kelly's DNA everywhere. Is that clean? No. Is that scientific proof? No. But here's what you have to understand about a murder trial. The defense doesn't have to prove what happened. They just have to make one juror go, okay, but maybe? Meanwhile, Santa Monica detectives keep digging into Kelly's money trail. They find out she wasn't just close with Dr. Ueda. She was being paid very, very well by him. Prosecutors later said that in the weeks leading up to the murder, large sums moved from him to her. We're talking $250,000 transferred to her shortly before Juliana was killed, and then more money, 6 figures more, in the months after. To the state, that screams, this is not a friend helping a friend. This looks like compensation. To the defense, those payments mean nothing criminal. They're going to argue she worked for him in multiple businesses, real estate, medical ventures, collections, whatever. Money moving between them proves a relationship. It doesn't prove murder. Still, with the DNA match in hand and the financial ties mapped out, the Santa Monica Police Department finally makes its move. In June 2010, more than 2 years after Juliana's murder, police arrest Kelly Soo Park and charge her with killing Juliana Redding. They say she strangled Juliana with her bare hands. They say Juliana fought like hell and lost. They say Kelly tried to blow up the apartment to erase herself and walked out thinking the scene would burn. But here's where the case takes a turn nobody saw coming at first. Kelly Soo Park does not plead guilty. She pleads not guilty, and she refuses to make a deal. She is going to trial, which means this. A Los Angeles jury is about to watch the state of California try to convince them that a well-dressed, calm, middle-aged professional woman walked into a 21-year-old aspiring actress's apartment, beat her, strangled her, staged a gas explosion, and walked out, all because of a business deal. And that jury is going to have to decide if that sounds insane, or if that sounds exactly right. When Santa Monica police arrested Kelly Soo Park in 2010, they didn't just call her a suspect. They said she was the killer. They said she was the woman whose DNA was on Juliana Redding's neck, her shirt, her phone, her stove, and in her apartment. They said she was the one who strangled a 21-year-old aspiring actress in her own bedroom, then tried to blow the apartment by turning on the gas and leaving candles burning. And quietly, they also said this: she didn't act alone. Let's rewind and line it up. By 2010, 2 years after Juliana's murder, police believed they had finally connected the forensic profile from the crime scene to a real person, Kelly Soo Park. Getting her DNA wasn't easy. She didn't just walk into the station and volunteer. Detectives tailed her and grabbed a discarded cigarette butt. Lab runs it. The lab compares it to the DNA from the apartment. They say it's a match. At the same time, detectives are working another angle: motive. Because murders like this don't happen in a vacuum. You don't just get a stranger who shows up, overpowers a healthy 21-year-old woman in her own home, throttles her to death with bare hands, cuts off her 911 call, and then stages a gas explosion. There has to be something driving it. And detectives think they've found that something in a man named Dr. Munir Uwaida. Here's what they say happened. Juliana had briefly dated Uwaida. He was older, wealthy, and ran in big-money medical circles. Through Juliana, he met her father, Greg Redding, an Arizona pharmacist. Uwaida allegedly pitched Greg on joining one of his businesses, a pharmaceutical and pain cream setup that, on paper, looked profitable. 6-figure money, bonuses, ownership. Greg considered it. Then, 5 days before the murder, he backed out. He told Uwaida no. He didn't like what he was seeing. He didn't like what he was being asked to sign on to. He walked. Then Juliana ended up dead. Detectives believed the timeline wasn't a coincidence. They also believed that Kelly Soo Park wasn't just some acquaintance in Uwaida's orbit. They described her as his enforcer, his problem solver, his fixer. In private, they said Uwaida called her his female James Bond. And they said this wasn't the first time she'd been sent to handle someone. So in March 2010, Santa Monica PD moved in. Kelly Soo Park was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and burglary in the killing of Juliana Redding. 2 days later, something else happened. Dr. Munir Uwaida was gone. He left the country, just disappeared. Investigators said he fled to Lebanon, 7,000 miles away. And once he left, he stayed gone. He would not be in that courtroom when Park went to trial. That was intentional. Because from that moment on, this wasn't just State of California versus Kelly Soo Park. It was State of California versus Kelly Soo Park, with a doctor-shaped shadow floating over it. Now let's talk about the trial. It didn't start right away. Park sat out on multi-million-dollar bail. Nearly 3 years went by before her case finally reached a jury in Los Angeles County in 2013. When it did, prosecutors came in hard. Their story was simple and brutal. Juliana wasn't killed in a random burglary. She was targeted because of a broken business deal. Kelly Soo Park was sent to fix that problem. Park went to Juliana's Santa Monica apartment on March 15, 2008. There was a violent struggle. Juliana tried to call 911 at 9:52 p.m. Someone ripped the phone away and cut the call. Juliana was beaten and strangled by hand. Park then tried to destroy the scene by turning on the gas and leaving candles lit, hoping the apartment would fill with gas, ignite, and burn all the evidence. When that didn't happen, Juliana's body stayed there until the next evening, when her mother in Arizona couldn't reach her and begged Santa Monica police to check on her. The prosecution had a weapon, and they knew it: DNA. They told the jury that Park's genetic profile was everywhere: on Juliana's neck, on her clothes, on that stove knob that had been turned to release gas, on Juliana's phone, on surfaces in her kitchen, in blood. The district attorney called it devastating physical proof. This woman was there, and she put her hands on Juliana. They also told the jury about money. According to prosecutors, Park wasn't just some friend who happened to know Uwaida. She was on his payroll. They said she was being paid thousands and thousands of dollars, eventually adding up to hundreds of thousands, in the period around the killing. They suggested that this wasn't a salary. It was payment for doing the kind of job other people don't want to put their name on. And then they leaned into motive. They walked the jury through the failed deal between Uwaida and Greg Redding. They drew a direct line from Greg backing out to Juliana being killed 5 days later. They said this wasn't a robbery, it was a message. They said Juliana died because her father said no. That was the state's story, but the defense came to fight. Park's attorneys did 2 big things. First, they attacked the motive. They told the jury that the entire theory, that Dr. Uwaida sent Park to intimidate Juliana over a business contract her father rejected, was speculation. They said there was no text, no voicemail, no document, no witness who could say, "Yes, Kelly told me she was going over there to threaten Juliana for the doctor." They said prosecutors were trying to turn business drama into a murder plot because it sounded cinematic. They also pointed out something huge. The judge wasn't going to let the jury hear most of the female James Bond stuff. Before trial, the state tried to introduce evidence to show Park's past as Uwaida's alleged muscle. Stories of her handling people, intimidating them, making problems go away. The prosecution felt this was critical. It showed that Park had done this before, that she wasn't some innocent real estate agent who got unlucky. It painted her as exactly the kind of person who could walk into Juliana's apartment and take control. The judge said no. The judge ruled that the state had not proven Park actually committed violent acts for Uwaida in those other situations. So those stories were too prejudicial. The jury would not hear that female James Bond nickname. The jury would not hear that Park allegedly acted like hired muscle. That was a huge blow to the prosecution, because now, in court, Kelly Soo Park wasn't being introduced as the fixer. She was just Kelly Soo Park. Meanwhile, the defense tried to go the other direction. They wanted to suggest that someone else might have killed Juliana. Specifically, that it could have been a different person, close to Juliana romantically. They had a witness they said could point the finger away from Park. That witness refused to testify. She took the fifth. So the judge shut that door too. The jury was not going to hear a full alternate suspect theory. That meant both sides went into trial partially handcuffed. The prosecution lost. She's a professional enforcer. The defense lost. Someone else did it. With those rulings in place, all roads went back to the evidence the jury was allowed to hear. And nothing in this case was louder than the DNA. Which brings us to the defense's second move. Attack the DNA without denying it. This is important. Park's lawyers did not stand up and say, "That's not her DNA." They couldn't. The lab work was too strong. The matches were too specific. Instead, they tried something else. They said DNA travels. They told the jury that you can transfer DNA without being present at the murder. You can touch someone or their belongings, and those cells, skin cells, sweat, trace biological material, can ride along. A t-shirt changes hands, a phone changes hands. An object moves from one space to another. Suddenly, your DNA shows up in a place you've never been. Now, does that explain why Kelly Soo Park's DNA was on Juliana's neck? The defense tried to stretch it that far. They suggested that if police already decided Kelly did it, they'd interpret every trace as violent contact. But if you assume she's innocent, you could see those traces as transfer. They pushed that word again and again, transfer. The prosecution called that ridiculous. They told jurors that Juliana Redding wasn't just in the same room as her killer. She was strangled. That is a hands-on, face-to-face, physical attack. You don't get DNA smeared around someone's throat and across their t-shirt just because you touched a phone once. You get that from a fight. The defense fired back, prove the context, show us the video, show us the eyewitness. You can't because you don't have one. You have a story. There was one more thing the defense wanted the jury to see. Kelly Soo Park herself. Not on paper, in person. They wanted the jury to keep looking at her, sitting there at the defense table in a blouse and blazer, calm, small-framed, quiet, and silently ask themselves, does this woman look like a hands-on killer who strangled a 21-year-old to death, dragged her body, staged a gas explosion, and walked out cool? Or does she look like someone the police decided to pin because the real target, the rich doctor, ran? The prosecution obviously warned the jury not to fall for presentation. They told them, do not let her outfit fool you. Violence doesn't always look like what you expect. It doesn't always look like a man with tattoos and a knife. Sometimes it looks like a woman with perfect hair and clean nails who can cut off your air in under a minute. When both sides finally rested, the jury got the case. The courtroom waited and waited and waited. Jurors deliberated for days, longer than the actual presentation of evidence at trial. That alone told everyone one thing. They were not in agreement. The question in that jury room was simple but deadly. Is DNA plus motive enough to send a woman to prison for life? Even if the man prosecutors say ordered the hit is gone, out of reach in another country? In part 4, we're going into that verdict. And what happened next when a courtroom exploded. The jury came back angry, shaking, and split. It was June 2013, 5 years after Juliana Redding was found strangled in her Santa Monica apartment, and 3 years after police arrested the woman they called the Fixer, Kelly Soo Park. The courtroom was packed. Juliana's parents were there. Friends were there. Reporters were there. Everyone was waiting for one thing: guilty or not guilty. The prosecution had told the jurors a very clean story. They said, This wasn't random. They said, this was business. They said, Juliana Redding was murdered because her father, an Arizona pharmacist named Greg Redding, refused to go into a money-making medical venture with a California doctor named Munir Uwaida. They said 5 days after Greg pulled out of that deal, someone broke into Juliana's world, overpowered her in her own bedroom, strangled her with bare hands, cut off her 911 call, turned her apartment into a gas bomb, and walked out. They said that someone was Kelly Soo Park. They said Park wasn't a jealous friend or rival model or random intruder. She was muscle. She was sent. And if you believed that story, there was a clear ending. This was first-degree murder. But the jury didn't just have to decide what sounded right. They had to decide what was proven. Let's talk about what they were given and what they weren't. They were given DNA. A lot of it. Jurors heard that Kelly Soo Park's DNA was on Juliana's neck, on her shirt, on her phone, on the stove knob that had been turned on to fill the apartment with gas while candles burned. An alleged attempt to blow the place and erase evidence. Investigators said that same DNA showed up in the kitchen, in blood. The prosecution said, this is not casual transfer. This is physical contact during a fatal struggle. They were given timeline. Jurors heard that Juliana attempted to call 911 at 9:52 p.m. on March 15, 2008, and that the call was cut off. That her mother in Arizona couldn't reach her the next day and begged Santa Monica police to check on her. That officers forced the door, found a violent scene, and found Juliana dead on the bedroom floor. They were given motive. Jurors heard that Dr. Munir Uwaida, older, wealthy, connected, had once dated Juliana, then met her father and tried to pull him into a lucrative pain cream pharmacy operation. They heard that Greg backed out of the deal, and according to prosecutors, that decision cost Uwaida serious money. They heard that Uwaida relied on Kelly Soo Park to handle problems, and that Park was paid tens of thousands of dollars by him. They heard prosecutors describe Park as his female James Bond, someone he allegedly used to intimidate people. They were given disappearance. Jurors were told that when police moved in on Park in 2010, Uwaida left the country. He was suddenly gone. Investigators said he ran, eventually surfacing overseas, and later being accused in a completely different massive insurance fraud case. He would not be present in Park's trial. He would not be sitting in the defendant's chair. She would. But just as important as what the jury heard is what they didn't get to hear. The judge did not allow prosecutors to spend hours telling the jury that Park had been used as a professional enforcer in other situations. The state wanted to paint her as Uwaida's fixer, the person who shows up when nice stops working. The judge said no, that was too prejudicial. Without a direct, proven violent act in those prior stories, the jury wasn't going to sit and hear she's a hired killer on repeat. That ruling mattered. Why? Because without it, Kelly Soo Park doesn't walk into court as the female James Bond. She walks in as a woman accused of murder. Different feel. Also, the judge blocked most of the defense's alternate suspect theory. Park's lawyers wanted to push a different man, someone close to Juliana romantically at the time, as the possible killer. They even said they had a witness who would testify that this other man had gotten violent and scary when Juliana's death was brought up. But when that witness got to court, she refused to testify and took the fifth. Without her, the judge wasn't letting the defense point a finger that couldn't be backed up in front of the jury. So both sides went into deliberations, missing pieces of the story they really wanted to tell. The state wasn't allowed to hammer professional fixer. The defense wasn't allowed to hammer it was someone else. That left the jury alone in a narrow box with two questions. Do we believe Kelly Soo Park physically killed Juliana Redding in that apartment? If yes, is that murder beyond reasonable doubt? The jury deliberated for more than a week, longer than most people expected, longer than most DNA cases ever take. Then, finally, they filed in. The clerk read the verdict. On first-degree murder, not guilty. That wasn't the end, because jurors were also allowed to consider lesser charges. So they went back, argued, listened again, argued more. And they came back a second time. On second-degree murder, not guilty, that was it. Kelly Soo Park was acquitted. In plain language, the jury did not convict her of killing Juliana Redding, and the courtroom blew up. Juliana's friends and family erupted. People in the gallery shouted at Park, "Murderer! Go to hell. This is a travesty." The anger in that room was so immediate and so loud that deputies had to hustle Park out through a back exit and drive her away under protection. Her defense attorney walked out saying his client was relieved and exhausted, and that she just wanted to disappear and get her life back. The district attorney's office said they strongly disagreed with the verdict, but respected the process. And just like that, the only person ever charged with Juliana Redding's killing walked out of a Los Angeles courtroom, a free woman. Legally, that's the end of the murder case against Kelly Soo Park. She cannot be retried for murder in Juliana's death. Double jeopardy attaches. It's done. But the story did not end there. After her acquittal, Park turned around and went after the investigators. She accused Santa Monica detectives of violating her rights, specifically of interfering with the one witness who might have backed up the alternate suspect theory. A federal court allowed her to sue, and in 2017, an appeals court said her claims were strong enough to move forward. In other words, the system didn't just fail to convict her, it gave her standing to fight back. Meanwhile, Dr. Munir Uwaida stayed in the wind. Prosecutors said he fled the U.S. in 2010, right after Park's arrest. Over the years, they painted him as the center of a different, massive criminal machine.
In 2015, grand jury indictments in Los Angeles County accused Uwaida and a network of associates of running one of the largest health insurance fraud schemes in California history. An alleged $150 million operation involving fake clinics, unnecessary surgeries, illegal kickbacks, and shell companies to move the money. Prosecutors said Uwaida let unqualified assistants cut open patients who believed he, a licensed surgeon, would be the one holding the scalpel. He was accused of leaving people physically scarred for profit. Authorities announced he'd been picked up overseas. Then they walked that back and said, actually, he wasn't in custody after all. He was reportedly living abroad, including in Lebanon, outside the reach of a California courtroom. Years later, cases tied to that alleged fraud were still grinding through the courts.
Other defendants were arraigned. Some co-conspirators stood in front of judges. Uwaida himself, according to prosecutors, remained a fugitive presence, shaping cases without physically being in the room. So here's where we really are now. Juliana's murder is technically unsolved. That's the part that doesn't sit right with anybody, especially the people who loved her. Because if you ask law enforcement, they'll tell you, we brought our case. We named the person we believe did it. We put her in front of 12 jurors. We laid out the DNA, the timeline, the money trail, the motive, the attempt to stage a gas explosion, even the failed 911 call. You heard all of it. And the jury still said, not guilty. If you ask the prosecution, they'll say we still stand by our theory. They still believe Juliana was murdered as fallout from a business dispute, a deal her father refused to sign, and that she died because people with money did not like being told no. If you ask the defense, they'll say the system worked. There was no video, no eyewitness, no confession, just a theory and some DNA that can be moved, carried, wiped, planted. They'll say Park was targeted because the doctor skipped town and someone had to sit in his chair. If you ask Juliana's family,
They'll tell you something much simpler. They'll tell you they lost their 21-year-old daughter in the most brutal way imaginable, alone, terrified, fighting for air on her bedroom floor. They'll tell you the person who did it is still walking somewhere. They'll tell you that, verdict or not, this was not random. Somebody did this on purpose. And if you listen to the anger that exploded in that courtroom when the words "not guilty" were read, you'll hear the part of this story that still has no ending. Juliana was 21. She had just moved her life to California. She was auditioning, modeling, doing halter-top magazine shoots, booking tiny roles, and calling her parents every day. She had a future, or at least she believed she had one. And in less than 5 minutes, somebody decided she didn't. That's where we leave this case. A young woman strangled in her own home. A 911 call cut off. A stove left hissing gas under candle flame. A fixer who walked out of court free. A doctor who slipped out of the country and still hasn't answered for any of it in a murder courtroom. And a family in Arizona that never stopped saying, this wasn't random, this was done to her. This case isn't over. Not really, because it still lives anywhere people say yes to money they shouldn't, and anywhere they say no when no isn't accepted. If you're still here, you're part of this now. This is the Witness Record. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Like the video to push this story.
Drop your thoughts in the comments. Guilty, innocent, or something in between, and hit the bell. Stay sharp, stay aware. You've been watching The Witness Record.